Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to do the preliminary remarks because Mike is coming from right over there. I'm Bob Shrum. I'm the Warsaw Professor of Politics and the Director of the Center for the Political Future. Mike is our co-director. Hopefully the conversation we have today, he and I are going to talk for a little while, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. And we'll talk a little bit about the center at the end. And this will not be, it may have moments of partisanship, but I hope it's analytical and gives a sense of where we are and where we're going in a year that, for the Warsaw Conference, we've named the year of politicking dangerously, 2021. So anyway, here's Mike. And since
apologies, in the great Republican tradition of debt limits, I waited till the last possible second. I went to the wrong tent. And I can tell you the medical school is fascinated with my insights into the Electoral College. Anyway, sorry, Bob.
You can take your mask off.
All right.
So I'll start off with a kind of general discussion. And, you know, Mike, since he's the Republican who went to the wrong tent, I'll let him go first. Where do you think we are right now in Washington and with Biden and the Republicans?
You know, we're, how do we put this? I think when President Biden won, there was kind of an expectation everything would be back to politics normal. But big tribalism doesn't go away without a fight. So on the Democratic left, you've got a tribalism of sorts. We just saw kind of an unprecedented thing where one faction of the party kind of told the president in his first year to slow down, we're in charge here. I think Biden handled it fairly adroitly, but that was kind of a shocker. And Republican world, not all of it, but a lot of it, all of it publicly, privately there's schisms, is looking down to Mara Elba, where the former POTUS still has quite a grip on things. So things are a little more normal in some ways and still totally abnormal, which may be the new normal in other ways. We're heading toward a midterm elections, which, as Bob knows, has a clarifying effect on politicians. They get worried. In the House, the Republicans have a lot of advantages. Historically, the first off-year election for a new president is normally tough. The redistricting and all that has a slight thumb on the Republican scale because the population has been growing in red states. In the Senate, much different and probably a little more Democratic leaning, though it'll be really close. So when the political stakes go up, people start to get defensive and look at their short-term political gain and worry a lot about their base. So it's not a big profile and courage formula. They tend to retreat to their corners, and we've made the corners stronger than ever before. So, you know, we're in the middle of the litigation. I think President Biden started out pretty well politically. Then we had Delta, which was bad for every incumbent, and he has dipped down, but the election is not now. And I think they know what they want to do to try to get the numbers back up to be more competitive in the midterms. The Republicans, meanwhile, have this burden of having an allegiance to somebody who, in the wider electorate, when you get outside of Republican primary, is very unpopular and a problem. You know, he just became the central topic of a California recall in a Democratic state. You saw what happened. So I think it's foggy with a chance of a partial Biden comeback. He's in trouble in the polling now, depending on what the economy does over the next 6 months, and I can argue either side of that. And I'm glad they got a debt ceiling deal, because that is a very dangerous thing to play with. But we're going to do it all over again in a few months, because they punted, each side hoping they'll be in a better position to fight over it in a few months. But that was, believe me, if you care about your dollar being worth anything, or the stock market, it was very good we didn't get down to a big banana republic finish there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with almost all of that. My own view is that the way Biden is being assessed right now reminds me of the way he was being treated by the media and in the Twitterverse in the run-up to the 2020 primaries. Basically, every event is a crisis. Every negotiating moment means that somehow or other his plans have fallen apart. I tend to, and I'll talk about those plans in a second, I tend to step back from that, and I believe that what happens in the midterms will be vastly influenced by three things. Number one is COVID under control, is the fact that we're now seeing it go down almost everywhere. Does that continue, or are we hit with another wave of it with the consequent economic impacts? Number two, what's the condition of the economy? If you read the New York Times this morning, you can find online, you can find two different interpretations of today's job numbers. That they were disappointing, economists expected more, and then you can find a column by Neil Irwin saying people are misinterpreting this. They're using standard statistical measures about how many people get employed when people go back to school, but we've had fewer people going back to school and therefore fewer people employed in dealing with them. So I think those are the first two things. The third thing is what happens to this ambitious legislative program. I think it would be a disaster if the infrastructure bill didn't go through, both politically and substantively. We need to do something about infrastructure in this country, and all you have to do is drive around Los Angeles and you know it. Yeah. And it's been tied. What Biden did, and I agree with Mike that he was pretty adroit, I don't know if this is what he was referring to, when he went up to the Hill to see the House Democrats, he gave the left something. He said, we're going to tie the two bills together so that they'll be voted on essentially simultaneously. And then he peeled back. In essence, he said, look, it's not going to be $3.5 trillion, which they never should have let it be named that anyway. It's $350 billion a year. It's not going to be $3.5 trillion. It's going to be somewhere around $2. Joe Manchin's still saying, the senator from West Virginia, he wants 1.5. I think they'll settle somewhere around 1.9. But they got to hold on to almost every vote. And you have members who are insisting that they want their pet project or pet idea, and it has to be included, or they won't vote for it. That would be suicide for the Democratic Party going into the midterms, in my view. You would have something that we haven't seen in a very long time, which is a president in his first year asking for his first big major legislative initiative and not getting it. When I look at the midterms, they're the only times in the past century when the in party has done well in the midterms are 1934, when Roosevelt was acting against the Depression and seemed to be doing it with great vigor, and Democrats gained in both the House and the Senate. 1962, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK lost one seat in the House, but he gained 3 seats in the Senate, which might go along with something of what Mike's scenario was. In 2002, after 9/11, when Republicans did very well. So I think we're at a moment when, people love horse race politics and horse race governing and what's happening today. I think we're at a moment when we need to step back and say that a lot of what's going to happen will depend on whether or not Biden succeeds to some extent with these legislative initiatives and COVID and the economy. One last thing I'll say. I suspect that some folks in the Biden administration may welcome the rollback of this so-called reconciliation to a figure closer to $2 trillion, because it requires far fewer tax increases. And the reason Democrats held on to the House, although they lost seats, was because they did well in the suburbs. And if you tell folks in the suburbs, by the way, when you die and you leave your house to your kids, and you bought it 40 years ago for $110,000 and it's now worth $5 million, the government is going to insist that the kids pay what would in California be right now a 44%, and may go up, capital gains tax on every penny gained. That's not going to be well received in the suburbs. That's why I think that's the kind of tax increase that's likely to go away as they negotiate this.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I want to just dive in a little on this budget war in the House, because it is sort of fascinating. So what basically happened was, they had this infrastructure bill, which came out of the Senate with over 60 votes. In other words, a lot of Republican support. Not easy in the current environment where both parties have the same bumper sticker, "We're right, you're evil," which is a problem because when your opponent's evil, any action is justified. It's like having the Ohio State-Michigan game. I'm from Detroit, and at the end, the losing team gets to burn down the stadium and murder everybody. It's not, they were evil. It's not good for football. So, but anyway, they got this infrastructure thing, which have no mistake, is a huge win for Biden. And I'm a conservative Republican. So, but I'll say it because nobody's been able to do that. And it goes sailing to the House. But the progressives want originally what was the $6 trillion. That was Bernie's number, $6 trillion. Now, footnote here. We throw this trillion thing around a lot. How much money is $4 trillion? And I have a new footnote, which Bob's going to want to hear. $4 trillion in adjusted dollars is roughly the cost of the Second World War to the U.S. government. Okay? Big money. Big money. Now, a historian heard me say that because it's a neat analogy and corrected me. So in the spirit of USC academic accuracy, I'm not so constrained on cable television. But for here, World War II had wage and price controls that kept the price down. But the bottom line is true. $4 trillion is a hell of a lot of money. So they took it from $6 billion, Bernie's idea.
Trillion.
Excuse me. Thank you, Bob.
I mean, you're a Republican. You're supposed to be good with numbers.
That was a role reversal. So billion, trillions, tax the rich. So $6 trillion got down to 3.5. Now, the theory was we'll raise taxes to pay for it. The problem is in the political world, there's a lot of phony accounting. So there's money you can actually get from taxes, which is like you'll get a higher bill. You'll feel it. That's real. Or companies will, somebody will. And then there's kind of we'll give the IRS $100 billion to hire more agents, and they're fined $1 trillion. Because it's got to be out there. Blah, blah, blah. So Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, his kind of silent partner literally, have looked at the tax thing, and the real tax number, if you don't do the phony money and you don't do some of the stuff Bob talks about that could be short-lived or politically disastrous, you're really at $1 trillion 4 to 5. So he's trying to put a cap on it. Well, meanwhile, over in the House, they're passing this infrastructure thing, big win, and the moderates, not many of them, but the ones from those suburban districts who could lose in the midterm, they're like, you're killing me here. Let's pass infrastructure, get the big win, then we'll whittle this thing down, and we're trying to keep the spending under control. The progressives said, no way. Progressive caucus is over 90 members in the House. And so basically the very able speaker, great old Nancy Pelosi, did the old speaker trick. When you walk into Pelosi's office, Steve Israel, probably a friend of Bob's, a great old Democratic member, said, you walk in there to meet with her, and you only get called in to see the principal when, there's something to talk about, normally you. And when you walk in, the first thing you see is a wonderful glass bowl of Ghirardelli chocolates. And next to it, a large souvenir baseball bat. And you kind of pick which meeting you want to have. She's happy to work either way. So she dropped the hammer on the big vote. She had promised the thing, and they had to pull the plug. It was a full revolt. Biden showed up, figured it out, looked around and said, boy, I see Nancy in her baseball bat, and I see 90 Chairman Mao hats. So, I'm going to put on a Chairman Mao hat and punt this thing back. So now they got to negotiate it out. It's going to be, Bob's right, they're trying to land it on $2 trillion, only $2 trillion. Manchin and his crowd are more like 1/6. The progressives now, who have tasted blood in the House, they have power, have to decide $2 trillion bill or no way we're going to hold our breath and we're going to go through this all again. And there's a shot clock running on the whole thing. Republicans, meanwhile, are thoroughly enjoying this because generally when my team has the ball, we drop it, we try to steal the election, we deny, we don't do smart stuff. But as long as they're screwing up, we want to get out of the way, which is one reason why shrewd Mitch McConnell did a strategic retreat on this debt limit showdown to let the spotlight stay on the Democratic thing. So I'm not sure what will happen. If Biden can get this packed away for 1, 9, or 2 and hold his progressives and then get his infrastructure, he'll still have a victory parade. But if this thing goes on for weeks and weeks and the president starts looking weaker and weaker and AOC's side is running the party, is it the end of the world? No. will those suburban Democrats all get clipped in the House, and new Speaker Steve Scalise or Kevin McCarthy will get out the jackhammer on all these programs? Yes. So it's one of these typical base things in both parties. Do you do the smart game for the big picture, or do you play your tribe hard? And that's what they have to sort out.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of and by the way, Mike's not wrong and he's not evil. And we're not going to burn the tent down.
Right.
I think that the White House is ultimately going to drive this car.
Yeah, and they should.
And they should. And I think that people like Bernie Sanders realize that if the car goes off the road, he's not going to be chairman of the Budget Committee in another year and a half. And he likes being chairman of the Budget Committee. Now, you do have, and this is a problem, and by the way, the Republicans had this problem. It drove Paul Ryan nuts. It drove him to resign. You do have a bunch of members now in the Democratic Party who actually haven't been in the minority. Right. They got elected in 2018. They don't know what it's like to be in the minority. So Nancy Pelosi, who saved the Affordable Care Act, who did a brilliant job of persuading the House to do something it never does, which is accept every jot and tittle of a Senate bill without an amendment, because Scott Brown had won Ted Kennedy's Senate seat in Massachusetts. There were no longer 60 votes in the Senate, and the House agreed to just pass the Senate version of the Affordable Care Act. It was I can't remember seeing anything as legislatively brilliant as that in decades. The other thing I'll say, by the way, is that this is a Houdini act for the Democrats. I mean, they have a one-vote margin in the Senate. If you think about when Lyndon Johnson was passing the Great Society, when FDR was passing all the stuff he was passing, there were huge Democratic majorities. Even Bill Clinton, when he couldn't pass health care, had bigger majorities than this. So it's a pretty daunting task. Now, I want to change the subject for a minute, Mike, because Liz Cheney just announced that the 9/11, the January 6th committee is going to enforce its subpoenas. And that, there are several ways to do that. One is to get the Justice Department to go after people. The other is Congress has the unilateral right to arrest people and put them in jail who won't respond to subpoenas. Now, that's obviously not going to go over well with Republicans. What do you see as the future of the Republican Party? Is it an entirely Trumpist future? I mean, McConnell yesterday, and, I'm a Democrat. I don't like McConnell, but he did the right thing. And I think come December, they'll figure out how to do the right thing again, because you can't crash the full faith and credit of the United States. But how much is the Republican Party, in your view, going to remain a purely Trumpist party? Is there any prospect of change?
Let me just quickly comment on Cheney, and then I'm happy to talk about that because it is the big Republican topic. If I were anybody who hears Liz Cheney with that congressional authority indicate she's really going to go after them, I would Google Cheney and waterboarding to get an idea. The family has a history of being serious in these matters. I would take her very seriously. And it's right, we've been to this thing before. Congress does have the right theoretically to go put the cuffs on somebody. And the big debate last time it came up was, well, we don't have a jail. Where do we put them? Because this has never been done. But anyway, yes, and I give her credit for it. She's running for re-election in a tough primary back home in Wyoming. The good news is, in a multi-way race, which is the Wyoming rule, she can win with 40%. That's how she first got elected, a little more than 40%.
And there's they're not party primaries.
Right,
Wyoming.
Exactly. It's all one big thing, kind of like Virginia. So that's good. The Trump folks, of course, know that, so they tried to get the state legislature a couple of years ago to change the rule for a runoff. And the Republican legislature said, no thanks. They literally sent one of Trump's kids there to work him, and they gave him a state flag and thanked him and sent him away. Still, the Trump world has endorsed one of her opponents, but not a particularly strong one, who's got some problems, and another one is hanging in there. So, she is not DOA in that primary, but she's at real risk. But she doesn't care about that. She's a rule of law conservative, and I applaud her for it. We could use a few more. As far as the future of the party, Political parties hate to lose. Because if you go into a losing pattern, your choice is extinction or change. And not unlike evolving animals, over time, they tend to evolve to survive. The problem we have now is Trump still has a strong grip, about 45 to 50%, 55%, depending on the region, up to 60 in the South, on Republican primary voters. And the question is, will that decline over time? There's some indication it's been declining, but we have to go litigate that. We're going to have a civil war, and we need to have it to settle the question. And it may not be one election cycle. It may be a couple. I would watch some of those races from the 10 members who voted to impeach Trump. He's going after all of them. One, a buddy of mine, Anthony Gonzalez in Northern Ohio, which was a race I was really looking forward to, left the office. He was an NFL star, Ohio State football star, suburban / a little bit of blue-collar district. I think he would have won his primary. I think he thinks he would have too, but he was tired of having state troopers pick up his 5-year-old at the airport when they came home for the weekend because of the death threats you get now if you're in his position. And so I can't blame him for pulling the plug, but that would have been a key battle. There are a few more. Cheney is one, et cetera, et cetera. But in the short term, the Trump gravity is a powerful fact of life. I cannot tell you how many members I know who privately despise him but feel like it's political suicide to say anything about it. And a final word on Mitch McConnell. Mitch is getting beat up today. It was a little keep in mind the Senate is kind of like the world's biggest, oldest Rotary Club. All right? And they all know each other. There are a lot of secret friendships around the aisle. There are personalities involved. So Mitch made a strategic retreat because Bob's right. It is not his goal to destroy the faith in credit. Ted Cruz immediately came up on the floor and chewed him out, and the conservatives. It was hard for Mitch to get to 60 to let the bill move through, which the Democrats passed with their votes. Chuck Schumer gave a fiery speech about what a jerk Mitch McConnell is, and then Manchin came up and called Schumer a name that we don't share in family discussions here. Because really, you're going to light the guy on fire for doing the right thing? In 3 months, we're going to be back here again. So a lot of our grown-ups on the conservative side are kind of hemmed in by this Trump thing. I know this about Mitch McConnell. If he was on a plane with Trump and it crashed and the two of them were in a lifeboat together and Mitch had a revolver with 3 bullets, he would shoot Trump 3 times. He wouldn't save one for a shark or if Ted Cruz managed to swim over. But he's checkmated in his own caucus in some ways. So, yeah, short term it's bad.
Yeah, the Lindsey Graham of some years ago, referring to Ted Cruz, said someone could murder Ted Cruz in broad daylight on the floor of the United States Senate. We could hold the trial in the Senate. We know who did it. No one would vote to convict. I mean, Cruz really made things tough for McConnell because he basically said, I'm going to filibuster this. So they had to get 60 votes, and they got 61. And then the Democrats passed the debt limit extension 50 to 48. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the center at the end of this, but I wanted to make sure that we left time for your questions, and you've heard enough bloviating from Mike and me.
We always have more, but yes. Let's do questions.
We can go on for a long time.
Yeah.
But because there are no mics for the audience, I'm going to repeat the questions. Okay. Yes, sir.
You said something that the next speaker, you said McCarthy or Scalise.
Yeah.
Scalise really got a chance over McCarthy?
Yeah. Again,
to repeat the question.
He referenced that I remarked Scalise as a possible speaker instead of Kevin McCarthy. Yeah, think Game of Thrones, one of those speaker elections. Bob Dole had a famous joke when he ran for a committee chairman thing. I went in there with 25 firm commitments, and there were only 20 people in the room, and he lost. So I would say Kevin's very good at attending to members' needs, but so majority odds on him, but a decent shot somebody else could beat him for speaker. He's controversial in the caucus.
I think Nancy Pelosi will be the next speaker.
I think she might retire. But anyway, yes, sir.
Go ahead.
So I've been observing lately Sinema and Mark Kelly and how they're comporting themselves differently in the same state. Which one's right? Which one's wrong?
Well, Mark Kelly has to run for
We should repeat.
Oh, yeah. Sinema and Mark Kelly, both from the same state, acting very differently. Mark Kelly has to run for re-election next year. He has to get through. He certainly doesn't want to invite a Democratic primary challenge, and so he's not going to. Now, I think he will end up being perfectly happy with a $2 trillion package. By the way, just so we understand, when we talk about all these trillions, in that same 10-year period, we will spend $9 trillion on the Defense Department. So we ought to put this in some perspective. So Kelly has to play a shorter game than Sinema. Sinema has to run in 2024, so she's got more time. Or 2026, she's got more time. She has a full term. And I think she also very much marches to the beat of her own drummer. She is, as Mike says, the silent partner to Joe Manchin. But Biden, you have to understand, Biden is a creature of the Senate. And he has negotiated deals for decades. And he understands what's going on here. The real question is whether or not the Progressive Caucus in the House becomes a kind of coach and horses that just decide to run away off the bridge and take the president with them.
Yeah, it's much better politically for Biden to get a $2 trillion deal than a 3.5, and it's also good for Biden to get those progressives back in line.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So if Nancy decides, if Pelosi decides to retire, and Hoyer's kind of not a young guy, who's your dark horse for the next speaker?
Question is, who's the next speaker if Nancy retires? And Steny Hoyer, her number 2, and kind of rival in the caucus, but too old, won't do it. Hakeem Jeffries?
Hakeem Jeffries is a congressperson from New York, African American. I think very good chance that if the Democrats control the House, he could be the speaker. But I think it's kind of a wide open race if the Democrats keep the House. Now, if the Democrats pull off keeping the House, and if Pelosi has run for re-election, I think there'll be a lot of people saying, wait a minute, why do we have to change this?
Right.
Let's keep her for at least another 2 years. I mean, she seems full of energy and really understands how to work the process and how to work the members.
Yeah,
probably the greatest speaker in terms of effectiveness in modern times, if not of all time.
I agree with that. I think what's likely to happen is if the Repubs win, there will be kind of a Democratic star search in opposition. Hakeem will be a big deal, and others will try to raise up. And then they have their own micro-politics in the caucus, which is about who's an effective fundraiser, what state are you from, the various factions, and also stuff like he helped my cousin get into the Naval Academy. You know, they're people. The little stuff really helps.
And who can be an effective spokesman? There's
a USC hat back there I want to reward. There we go. Yeah, they're available at the gift store. Yeah.
Yes, thanks for being here. To the extent that the Republican Party is now the Trump Party, and to the extent that the price of admission now seems to be lying about voter fraud and saying that there wasn't a violent attack on the Congress on January 6th, aren't principled conservatives like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney really rhinos? And if that's the case, why don't principled conservatives start their own new party?
Okay, the question is, I'll do it backwards. Why don't principled conservatives start a new party? Because the rule of law conservatives, the Kinzingers, the Cheneys, seem to be kind of surrounded, and it seems like the price of admission now to be a good Republican activist, you have to question the results of the election. Fair? Okay. There's a lot of talk about that. The problem is then you're kind of in the French vanilla business. You got vanilla ice cream, you got French vanilla, and you got chocolate, and French vanilla is kind of stuck in third. Though the people who argue for it say, yeah, but we're really going to screw those bastards over at the vanilla company because chocolate will be number one. And so there is a big debate about this in the, quote, movement of which I am a member of conservatives who are having heart attacks about some of this Biden spending and the liberal left coming up. And I can go into my spiel about all the horrible stuff on their side. But the first battlefield is the primaries because we're not quite ready to give up a battle for the party that involves not what reporters in D.C. are writing, but what primary voters choose to do. And so that's round one, but that option is being discussed quite a bit. There's a race worth following, and I'm plugging a friend of mine. Evan McMullin, who is a decorated CIA officer, is running for Senate as an independent, probably with a lot of Democratic support in Utah, against incumbent Mike Lee. It's kind of a hybrid thing. Breakaway, they'd have their own party Republicans. Plus Democrats aren't going to love Evan McMullin. He's a conservative, but they look around. Hell, it's Utah. Because otherwise we run some sociology professor and get 19%. Mullen ran against Trump for president, got 22 or 3% of the vote in Utah. So he's a real player there, and that's going to be interesting to watch. But you're right, things may reformulate a little going forward.
Look, I'm going to say one thing. I think we need two governing parties in this country because we're going to sometimes one party is going to win, sometimes the other party is going to win. And my problem with the current situation is that the Republican Party, if it remains a Trumpist party, is not only very bad at governing, but isn't a conservative party. I mean, the conservative party of Ronald Reagan was for free trade. The conservative party of Ronald Reagan made a deal on immigration reform. The conservative party of Ronald Reagan made Social Security, and they did a deal with Tip O'Neill in one case, with Teddy Kennedy in another, made Social Security fiscally sound for a generation. None of that is where the Republican Party is today. So while I said Mike wasn't wrong before, he was wrong this time. If vanilla stands for conservative, then I would say if you had a third party, and there are huge obstacles to it, if you had a third party, it would be vanilla. And I think the current Trumpist Republican Party would be, say, prune ice cream.
Or Rocky Road, to go with the obvious analogy. All right. Sir, right back there.
What's your opinion on the filibuster and what the Democrats should do about it? Well, at least on paper, they have.
There's right now there are no votes to change the rules and get rid of the filibuster. By the way, I think if the Republicans take over the Senate and they have a Republican president, they get rid of the filibuster. The only prospect, I think, there are only two prospects for carving out an exception to the filibuster. One would be if we were headed for a crash on the debt limit. And that may have been one of the reasons that McConnell did what he did, that there was going to be a carve out to the filibuster. The other is Joe Manchin took this very expansive Democratic voting rights bill that passed the House, the For the People Act, and he created a much more moderate version of a voting rights bill. And he has said, I think I can get 10 Republicans to vote for this. And if he can't, I think the long game for Biden is to hope that Manchin at that point would agree to carve out an exception to the filibuster only for voting rights. But otherwise, the votes aren't there. I keep saying people used to think I was the most liberal consultant in the Democratic Party. I haven't changed. It's just the party has changed to some extent. And I keep saying to some of my friends who are to the left of me, Lyndon Johnson said you got to count the votes. Count the votes. If the votes aren't there, all the tweets in the world aren't going to make any difference. Politics is not about, at least governing is not about psychic satisfaction, making yourself feel good. Yep. It's about actually getting something done.
Yeah, look, when the votes aren't there, too, I'm pro-filibuster. I've rethought it a lot, but I've stuck with pro-filibuster simply because people hate the filibuster right now because emotionally they see it as the thing in the way of getting everything they want if you're on the Democratic side. There are a lot of Republicans who think get rid of the filibuster and we can finally make abortion a felony, we can finally go door to door. Believe me, you give one side a nuclear bomb, both sides have a nuclear bomb, and they're both happy to use it. So I stand with Manchin on that one.
And I think the Republicans, if they have a Republican president and a Republican Senate, will immediately get themselves a nuclear bomb.
Dinner bet. I disagree.
Well, I won the last bet.
It's a rematch.
You know what he said? He said Biden would be gone before the Iowa caucuses.
Right. And after he lost New Hampshire, you came to me and said, I think I lost the bet.
I did not.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
Ma'am, rescue us from ourselves there. Yes. Yeah, I thought you had your hand up.
I did.
Yeah.
First of all, I guess there's I'm a big fan of both of you because you represent, I think, politicians that bring back moderate, I don't know, the way in which we both could be able
Sure. We like to call it civility because I am a right-wing nut and Bob has a KGB file which is positive. But anyway, continue, please.
The reason that we're all laughing at the joke you just told is because now that's the common way we all speak to one another.
Right.
I think, how do you guys feel about the asymmetric approach in the media in terms of understanding truth and facts, and how with my neighbors, I can't even have that discussion because where they get their facts are a different place where I get my facts, and we both, I know I'm right, but
We should repeat.
Yeah, the question is, we're so polarized now, and we don't have any common basis of knowledge. So how do we get to the point where we deal with each other in civil ways? By the way, I think in the Senate especially, privately, there are some civil relationships between Republicans and Democrats, but they dare not show it. Children's Health, the S-CHIP program, which ensures the health of 9 million kids and has done it now for 20-some years, was Kennedy's idea. It was a Republican Senate. He needed to get a Republican co-sponsor. He went to Orrin Hatch, and Orrin Hatch said, well, Ted, I don't want a big federal program. And Kennedy said, how about if we have a federal program, but we have the states administer it? And Hatch said, well, I could be for that. And as a result, 9 million kids have health care. Today, I don't think an Orrin Hatch would dare to accept that invitation because he would fear what would happen to him in a primary back home. Look, in 1960, for a long time, we operated on a relatively common basis of knowledge. In 1960, Kennedy was for Medicare, Nixon was for an alternative to Medicare. But Nixon didn't get up and say, this is a communist plot to take over the healthcare system. They had a debate about it. And that common base of knowledge was due to the fact that we had a media dominance. It was the New York Times, the Washington Post, later the LA Times, and NBC, CBS, and to some extent an emerging ABC. In 1962, if someone had gone to Walter Cronkite, the anchor at CBS and the most trusted man in America in many ways, and said, there's this group called the John Birch Society, and they're going to hold a press conference today in New York where they say that Eisenhower was an unwitting agent of the communist conspiracy, and Kennedy is a direct agent of the communist conspiracy. That is, he has a big KGB file. How many cameras do you want to send? Cronkite would have looked up at the guy and said, you're fired. Today we have a completely shattered media universe. I don't see how you put the genie back in the bottle. In mainstream journalism, there is suddenly an ongoing conversation about what's called both sidesism, which is if you put one quote about climate change, you got to get a climate denier. And there are people now in the mainstream journalistic community saying we shouldn't be doing that. And in fact, you see some of that when people get on and say, or you read the newspaper and it says, so-and-so is propagating the lie that the election was stolen. It wasn't stolen. But that doesn't mean people still can't go to another channel where they're going to find someone to agree with them. I mean, AT&T, it turns out, invested $100 million in One America News because they wanted to have some more conservative outlet as a source of revenue. So I'm actually kind of depressed about the prospects of putting this genie back in the bottle. Flip side, and I want to give Mike a chance to answer this. Flip side, this has democratized politics to some extent, a very important extent, which is that you can now fundraise on the internet in a way that has exploded the amount of money spent in campaigns, but means that ordinary people don't feel just like spectators, say, in a presidential contest. They can contribute, they can make a difference, and as all of you know, if you watch your emails every day, if you ever gave money to a Democratic presidential candidate or a Republican presidential candidate, your name is written on bathroom stalls all over the country.
The media is a challenge here. because they cover politics like sports. Coaches, polls, and conflict. Who got fired, who got hired. Fight, fight, fight. Donald Trump, when he ran in 2016, got 7 times more free coverage on cable news among the 3 networks than anybody else. They're a business. I work at one of them. They're watching second to second what you're doing, and if you switch over to home shopping, they turn up the heat because they're guys at the top and women who are running a P&L, and it's a problem. And because the revenue for cable is not about advertising, it's about the subscriber fee. So when Fox Sports News wants to get more money for covering the Dodgers here, they threaten to turn off Fox Cable News, knowing that the local cable people will get 500 angry calls a day. So that stickiness is the motive, not the biggest numbers. Ratings aren't what they used to be, not in that business. So that leads to kind of punchline, hot headline tribalism. And, you know, you can turn in you can do it with MSNBC after prime time. You can hear exactly what you want to hear, what facts you want to hear. Nobody's challenged anymore. There's also the internet where hot messages travel farther for free. And digital technology allows us really to kind of push that. So the incentives are toward tribalism and division, and that's where the rewards are, and people are kind of following it. We've also had what Bob referenced. The grassroots have a lot more power in the parties now. I'm against that. I'm an elitist. I like political bosses. Just like the old joke that war is often too important to be left to all the generals. Well, sometimes politics is a little too important to be left to your crazy uncle across the street who gives $100 and is really hard on one side or another. In the old days, politics was a show they put on to get elected, and then Sam Rayburn used to have a little room off the floor called the Board of Education. It's where he'd drag them in, get them drunk, and close the deal. There are no more boards of education. So how do we fix it? I don't know. It's really hard, and we're reinforcing the tribal need we have to feel secure among ourselves. One problem we have is this obsession in politics with identity. I'm now told I'm an old white guy, so I got to be a Trump Republican. Somebody's a young Latino. Oh, that means you have to be a Democrat, and they're your enemy. Because all of a sudden our DNA code is dictating what our political views ought to be, and another kind of tribalism, which makes us turn inward and divide. Now, I'm on the board of the University of Chicago Institute of Politics. I'm up to my neck in institutes. And I've been on the board since the beginning. David Axelrod, a friend of Bob's and mine, founded it. And we do a cool science experiment there. We go down to southern Illinois in a rural Trump county, and we grab a bunch of kids. And, you know, pickup trucks and MAGA hats, the whole deal. They represent their county. And we go into the city of Chicago in Cook County, and we get a bunch of Democratic kids, many of color, and heavily progressive, heavily Democratic. They do have the advantage of voting 8 or 9 times in a Cook County election, but despite that skill...
Well, if you go far enough in southern Illinois, the MAGA people can vote 8 or 9 times,
well,
too.
we're hard to catch up with Cook County. Hell, I vote there. And according to the rules, I've been dead 28 years. But point being...
Mike, you are propagating the myth.
Yeah. Point being, we lock them all in a hotel together for a weekend. And by the end of it, they're dating. The kids, you know, I mean, it's pretty amazing because humans do tend to, when you get all the media intermediaries out of the mind, they're like, yeah, and they kind of get along.
Yeah. Well,
so just to finish, we now, with the digital world we all exist on, the old days you'd work a precinct. You'd have a precinct captain, you'd have squads knock the door, you'd know your neighbors, you know Mrs. Flannery's son needs a job at the fire department, or dumb son's going to sanitation, you know, the old daily machine theory. But it took care of people, it was a two-way exchange. Even in the Singapore dictatorship, they make their guys run for re-election. If they don't get neighborhood approval, they get somebody else in there. So the point being, that politics is now, you don't talk to your neighbors, you talk to your friend from high school 1,000 miles away on Facebook who's telling you the vaccine will actually, you know, give you cancer. And all that information travels for free. So we've broken down the social bonds that make people occasionally, and the way we live in these garage out communities, nobody lives next door to anybody they disagree with that they even know them. Just real quick, Singapore, after their independence, had a big problem with the threat of ethnic civil war. They had an Indian community, they had a Malay indigenous community, and they had a Chinese community. The Brits had brought in the Indians as sport labor. And they all didn't trust each other, and a civil war was going to break out. What they do there is they make everybody live together and serve in the army together. And they've eliminated the problem. So unless we do that, I think the problem will compound.
Yeah. Daniel Patrick Moynihan said everybody's entitled to their own opinions. Nobody's entitled to their own facts. We live in a world where everybody seems entitled to their own facts. Now, I know there are other questions here, but we have almost no time left.
Real quick here, because you've been raising your hand for a while. Yes.
Is Biden going to run in 2024?
I'll bet he'll try. I don't know.
I think
if
it
he will.
all depends on his health. It depends on his health and on the state of his presidency. Now, we wanted to talk for the last 3 or 4 minutes, and we're tight on time, about the center. It was established at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. The idea was to promote a dialogue where we respect each other and we respect the facts. We've done very well. I want to ask all of you to think about giving us some help. And I'm going to let Mike, who, he could pitch anything. And this is a really great product. So I'm going to let Mike do a pitch, and we'll conclude with that.
Well, now you're stuck in the car dealership. Bob is the Miss Oklahoma who lures you in, and I'm the closer. We're going to move some iron here.
Not Oklahoma. Not Oklahoma.
I grew up around the car business, so here goes. We punch way above our weight here, if not a lot of money. The university is very generous to us. Amber is a tremendous supporter, and we get a lot done. But we're 1/3 or 1/4 the funding of some of our brother institutes, and we're trying to make this place the premier thing on the West Coast. Now, what do? We help a zillion kids get internships. In a presidential year, we send 10 or 12 of them out to the Iowa caucus for a month and a half to work on real campaigns for president, meet real people, and have a network that can get them a real job in politics, which is a hard commodity to find. We bring in all kinds of people. A lot of it's been on Zoom. Now that we're opening up, you're going to see more of it in person, but we do a ton of good programming with nationally famous people in politics. So here's the help we need. To do more, we got to go raise it. You can look at our website. We have the Center Leadership Circle. There's all kinds of stuff to sponsor. It's tax deductible. I'm sure the development people here are not shy, and they're working for a lot of stuff, but we are a low overhead, high impact organization. We're trying to raise a couple hundred more thousand to do more. We would love to do one of these things where we put kids from Bakersfield and LA together for a weekend and learn about that. We have no shortage of ambition, but we got to raise some money to do it. So check out our website, or Kami's around here somewhere. He's brought his credit card machine probably. He's not actually. Oh, he's not. Okay, we're not hard to find. So, or just sneeze twice and wink, we'll find you. But we would appreciate any help. We will put it to real work. We're trying to help kids understand a better politics, and we're trying to give them a quick ladder into the real world of politics, which is pretty open. And we need more good people in it, because the incentives now are to scare the good people out, and I don't think you really want to be governed by a bunch of morons. So if you help us, we would be very grateful. So thank you.
So, good pitch. I want to thank you all, and leave you with one note. I taught 150 students on Zoom in a course last fall called the 2020 Election in Real Time. I teach a fair number of students every semester. I want to tell you, your sons and daughters are absolutely terrific people and very smart, and we engage with them at the center all the time. So thank you for being here. And this 50 minutes went really fast, at least from my perspective.
And we can answer a few more up here if you want afterwards, so come on up. Oh, no, wait a minute. Hands are going. Can we extend 5, or do I go to USC
Can we go 5 more? Yes, go.
All right, quick, right there. We're going to do speed round.
Okay, so as a private citizen who cares deeply about gerrymandering,
right.
What's something I can do?
Move to Iowa where they do it right. Bob?
Look, gerrymandering is going to continue in the places where it exists. Congress could outlaw it, probably. And Joe Manchin's voting rights bill actually has some anti-gerrymandering provisions. That's the only hope. Otherwise, it's in states where you have initiative and referendum, you can establish independent commissions like the one we have in California.
Yeah, the whole system is creeping toward a little bit better outcomes. One reason is the red states are getting redder and the blue are bluer, so there's less need for it. But you just got to be thorny about it and bug politicians, because both sides love what they got because they know how to work the system.
Okay, speed round.
Yes, ma'am.
Real quick, do you guys have a podcast?
Yes.
It's only once a year, so you do. So I can
We have a lot of podcasts. We have the Bully Pulpit. We renamed it.
will I be able to find it on
Oh yeah, and every program we do becomes a podcast, and we're also on Facebook Live. Every program that we do, and C-SPAN has covered 2 of our most recent events. Although they haven't been broadcast yet, they will be broadcast sometime this month.
I'm afraid to watch C-SPAN or Fox because you say they know what channel I'm on.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
She's afraid. She's afraid because.
Network because you said that they know what I'm watching.
Yeah, it's all right. You can, you can get a VPN and really drive them mad with your internet connection.
Yeah, but by the way, I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's a little like the idea that there's a tracking device in the vaccine. You know, what kind of idiot doesn't understand that you're carrying a cell phone around, and so people know where the hell you are all the time anyway?
You go to our website. The podcast is there. I'll do a plug too. There's also one called Hacks on Tap. I do with David Axelrod every week. All right. Yes, right there.
So we've talked a lot about domestic politics.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about domestic politics, but
Yeah.
do you see Afghanistan or like refugee crises having an impact on midterm elections, or is this pretty domestically?
Refugee crisis in terms of how it plays out domestically. Afghanistan, I'm of the view, I don't know whether Mike thinks this, that it will fade away as an issue in public consciousness. Just as Vietnam, by the time Ford got to the 76 election, Vietnam wasn't an issue. And we'd helicoptered off the roof of the embassy, for God's sake.
Foreign policy stuff tends not to be in the center of elections, but when it gets in the center, it gets there big. And one of the scary things about Afghanistan, we can debate the Biden policy and all that. I see a lot of errors. But right now, those Taliban guys have a red button on the desk, and anytime they want to take over American politics with a car bomb, they can. They're hoping for money right now, but it's a shakedown like the North Koreans do. So they may make a little trouble for attention next year, and they would then get back in the center, and we'd be relitigating it, which could be tricky for the president.
Possible, but I think unlikely. Okay.
Sir, right there in the back.
This poor guy has been trying
Okay,
for...
all right, go ahead.
I love the conversation because it's a conversation. And my question is bigger picture, though. I mean, I love how we pass legislation, what's going on with particular running elections. But the bigger question is how much stress is our system over on historically? Are we at the verge of another civil war? Because I was aboard with January 6th. I'm like, that's it. This has got to be the end of Trumpers. But no, there's people who still think that that's okay. I'm like, that can't be okay. Is this a sign of something getting worse, or is it going to be an aberration?
There are people who think January 6th was just fine. He thought it would be the end of Trumpism. Are we on the verge of a second civil war? Quick answer from Mike, quick answer from me.
No, luckily we're a service economy now, so nobody can fight. When 80% of Americans owned a rifle and could shoot in the 1800s, easier. I am worried. I think we're under the greatest stress since probably the Great Depression or even before. And we're becoming ethnically divided like we used to be. But I don't think we're on the brink of civil war. I do think we're on the brink of massive political failure, particularly when the next big domestic crisis comes.
I generally agree with that. I do think that we face a danger in 2024 of assuming, if Trump is the nominee and assuming he still dominates the party, of legislatures in states like Arizona just saying, well, maybe Biden got more votes, but they're phony votes, so we're going to send a slate of Trump electors. At that point, I think the system would begin to come apart. I did Al Gore's campaign in 2000. It was really hard to concede. He believed that he was elected, but just not going to be inaugurated. But he didn't pause. He thought he had to concede. He thought he had to do it for the good of the country. And I think it's something that history will will credit him for. Richard Nixon did the same thing in 1960.
Can I quickly just agree, and especially on Nixon? But one point,
Especially on Nixon.
General,
It's the only good thing he ever did.
well, it was a big good thing. Your guys stole it from him in Chicago anyway.
That's what you were doing earlier. It's not true.
No, it is true. But before we lose our grip on civility, just one point. This was kind of missed, and it was covered in a hyperbolic way. But General Milley made a good point. The U.S. military does not take an oath to the president. They take an oath to the Constitution, and they only follow lawful orders. If January 6th had escalated, U.S. Armed Services would have stomped that thing down if it got to that.
But
we
that-
have
that
a
would
good citizen, patriot, law-abiding, constitutional respecting military.
But that would have been a terrible precedent.
Terrible.
For the military
And
to have
they
to
would be
intervene
very
in that
slow
way.
to get there. But the point is, other places don't, which is why they have coups.
Okay, I'm told we have to cut this off. I'm really sorry.
We're getting the
I will say, by the way, Kennedy would have won the Electoral College without Illinois, so it's a kind of academic
They
debate.
stole it in Texas, too, with LBJ.
God, you sound like a Trumper.
He's making more and more sense to me as I hear you.